Hello, I am at Sioux Falls Christian in the fourth grade this semester, and we really don't have a ton of behavior issues, to be totally honest. And the ones that we do have are very tame in nature. I've definitely been blessed with the kids that I have. With that said, there was one situation this past week. The kids were working independently. They had just came in from recess. And I was walking around just checking on how students were doing. And I noticed as I walked by one of my really high achievers that they were just kind of sitting there. And that wasn't like them at all. So I stopped and I asked him if he understood what was happening. And we're working on fractions right now. So it was problems like 1/3 of 24. They had to figure out what that was. And he didn't respond, didn't say anything. And so I asked him if everything was all right, and he promptly responded, "I'm fine," but kind of brusquely. And so I just came down to his level and asked if I could explain the math to him, thinking that that was the issue, that he was just frustrated by the fact that he wasn't understanding. And so I started to slowly explain how to do it, trying to use some visuals, different things, hopefully just trying to work him to a better place mentally with it, so that he wasn't as frustrated. And about halfway through my explanation, I became aware that he was starting to cry a little bit. His eyes were tearing up. His body language was very standoffish, and he was clearly upset. And so I kind of stopped in the middle of my explanation and asked him if we could go outside of the classroom, because I figured that everybody's working silently. It would bring a lot of attention to him if we were to continue this discussion that was clearly upsetting him for some reason. And he would start to cry. Everybody would have noticed in the class. It was pretty much silent. And so I wanted to remove him from that situation to just remove the potential shame or embarrassment that might have caused. So we got outside of the classroom and just sat down at a table out there. There's a workroom right outside of the room, and asked him what was up and if there's anything I could do to help. I was like, I think this is a little bit more than math. Tell me if I'm wrong, basically correct me if I'm wrong. And turns out he shared that at recess, his friends that he was playing with had basically told him that they didn't want to play with him anymore. And so he ended up sitting alone for most of recess, and had brought that hurt inside with him. And so that continued, and he was feeling those feelings of being left out as he was working on math. And so it wasn't necessarily just math, obviously. And it turns out, too, he was also struggling with math. And so it was just the perfect storm of both of those things together, struggling at something that he's normally good at, and then also just feeling socially like he had failed as well. During recess. And so we were able to kind of talk that out, and I was able to encourage him and get him to the point where he was no longer crying, and we transitioned him back. Well, I transitioned him back into class, came back in, got back to work. None of the other students knew that anything had happened. They probably just thought that I was discussing some sort of math thing with him, which isn't out of the ordinary. I do that, pull kids out of class fairly often just to discuss homework or whatever. So hopefully by handling it the way I did, we avoided shame and embarrassment for that student. But as far as what my cooperating teacher did and said during the situation, she wasn't actually in the room during the time she was making copies. When it was happening, like, immediately. So that was kind of a time where I definitely had to step up and just do what I thought would be best. And luckily it ended up turning out all right. But afterwards, I kind of talked through the whole thing with my cooperating teacher just to make sure that I had handled everything the way that I should have, and just to make sure I hadn't left anything out. And she did bring up that I probably should talk to the two kids who that boy had mentioned had left him out at recess, and just kind of get their side of the story as well, and try to be a mediator in that situation. And so I did end up doing that the next day, and it was just a misunderstanding. But once again, that was really good to get that advice from my cooperating teacher, because I think I probably just would have moved on without talking through that with her. So, yeah, that was my situation that I dealt with this past week.